You really get a sense of just how insignificant you are when you live in a country like Scotland and are surrounded by things that are hundreds, if not thousands of years old. These things, built out of stone, somehow managed to survive through the ages, and they're still here today, allowing us a glimpse into a past that may have otherwise been forgotten. That's the gift of a place like Old Aberdeen. This is the Brig of Bulgownie. It used to be called the Bridge of Dawn, named after the River Dawn that flows underneath it. I actually grew up just up the road from this bridge, and it wasn't until relatively recently that I learned of its significance. I used to come down here as a kid, chuck rocks into the river, and I had no idea of its historical importance. This is in fact the oldest bridge in Scotland. Construction of this bridge began in the late 13th century at the behest of the Aberdeen bishop at the time, a guy called Henry Le Chen. But this period of time also happened to be the same period of time where much of Scotland was fighting for its independence against Edward I, who, if you've seen Braveheart, you'll probably remember as Edward Longshanks or Hammer of the Scots. So the bridge actually wasn't completed until the year 1320 at the behest of Robert the Bruce. This was a few years after the Battle of Bannockburn, which solidified his position, at least in the eyes of Scottish people, as King of Scotland. So from the year 1320 all the way up until 1830, which is when they built a much larger bridge a bit further down the river, this bridge here was the only way to move goods, or for that matter an army, up the northeast coast. These days it's mainly used by tourists and people walking their dogs. I wonder what Robert the Bruce would think about the bridge he built being considered a tourist attraction if he was still alive. If he saw this video, he'd probably be trolling in the comments section, insulting me with words I don't understand. Robert the Bruce probably spoke Norman French, Scots, Gaelic, Latin and probably Middle English, none of which I speak, so I'd have to use Google Translate. Imagine using Google Translate to find out that Robert the Bruce has called you a dickhead in French. This park in front of me here is called Seatan Park. It's the largest park in Old Aberdeen. And this structure to my right is an old military bunker. Now I know what you're thinking. Why is there a military bunker overlooking a children's playground? Are Scottish kids really that bad? Well, sometimes, but we don't normally have to get the military involved. This bunker actually dates from World War II. It was built in 1940 or thereabouts. There are pillbox bunkers like this one all over the northeast coast. So what was going on in 1940 that would necessitate the building of defensive bunkers all over the northeast coast of Scotland? Well, it's a long story, but suffice to say, there were more German speakers in Denmark and Norway that year than usual. And the powers that be felt it was a good idea to fortify the area. It's quite a thing to imagine, really. The German army, having successfully stormed Aberdeen Beach, start goose-stepping their way towards Bridge of Dawn, only to be massacred by some guy, braver than I'll ever be, hiding up here in this bunker in the forest of Seatan Park. I suppose we'll be able to reuse these old bunkers when the Russians invade, which, by my calculation, should be any day now. When I'm drafted, I'm going to request a bunker with a nice view like that one. I want the last thing that I see before I'm burned alive or blown to bits to be a nice park or a beach or something like that. Of course, the greatest generation who fought in World War II were built of stronger stuff than us millennials. The Russians won't face much more than a token resistance here. Most of us won't survive basic training. I probably won't even fire my weapon. What's the point? So this is the cemetery on the grounds of Mer Cathedral, which is just over my shoulder to the right. There's actually been a church here on this site since 580 AD, but that was replaced in the 12th century with a Norman-style church, and then that church was replaced in the 13th century by an English-style cathedral, which is more or less what you see here. My favourite part of the cathedral are these twin towers that you can hopefully see behind me. These are defensive structures that date back to the 14th century, and they're the sort of thing you would normally expect to see in a castle. They were built after Edward III came out to Aberdeen and basically torched the place. I guess they felt that they should be better prepared in case they were invaded again. The tops of the towers, just before the spiral, which was added later, are called battlements. And basically a battlement consists of a parapet to hide behind, and then there are these gaps called crenels. And these gaps can be used by archers to fire arrows down on an attacking enemy. You might think this is a strange feature for a church to have, but in medieval times, the church was often the largest and strongest building in the whole community. So in times of war, the local people could retreat to the church and hide inside until the danger passed. I like to think that I'd be up on that battlement, firing arrows down upon the enemy, but let's be honest, I'd be inside with the kids, crying and trying to figure out a way to use them as a human shield. This is the oldest part of the church here. It's called the Nave. It's where most of the congregation sit. And it dates back to the year 1450. The wooden ceiling was put in later and finished about the year 1520. The decoration you can see up there is various coats of arms that pertain to powerful people of that time. Aside from the actual church itself, this stone behind me is the oldest artifact in the building. It's an old Pictish stone, and they reckon it dates from 580 AD. There are stones like that one all over the northeast of Scotland, and especially near the River Don, which makes sense because human beings tend to settle near a source of water. The stone was found on this site back in 1932, so it most likely formed part of the original Pictish church that used to stand here. All in all, they reckon it was under continuous construction for more than 250 years. It's actually technically not a cathedral because it's not the seat of a bishop, and it hasn't been for more than 300 years. The role of the bishop was abolished during the Scottish Reformation, but they kept the name and they still call it a cathedral. A bit like when a woman keeps her husband's surname after the divorce. This neighbourhood, the one surrounding Mer Cathedral, is where all the priests used to live, 29 in total. Another word for priests back then was canons, which is where this neighbourhood gets its name from, the chanonry. Those priests were all fired during the Scottish Reformation and replaced with 2 ministers. And if we keep walking to the end of the road, we're going to arrive at Aberdeen University, where I spent 3 long, boring years studying law, almost 20 years ago. So young, so much promise. And look at me now, talking to myself in public like a nutcase. So this is the oldest building in the University of Aberdeen, which is incidentally the third oldest university in Scotland behind Glasgow and St Andrews. So the bishop at the time, the Bishop of Aberdeen, a guy called William Elphinston, he sent a letter to the Pope in 1495 and asked permission to open a university in Aberdeen. And in the letter, he explained why there was such an urgent need to educate the people up here. And basically it came down to the character of the men from Aberdeen. He described us as rude, ignorant of letters, and almost barbarous. And honestly, walking around the city centre these days, you can see that not much has changed. And here we are inside the church. It's amazing to see that it's still in use some 500 years later. And here is the tomb of the bishop who's responsible for the building of this university, William Elphinston. It's an empty tomb, and apparently they didn't have space to put it inside the church, which is why it's out here.
The Scottish education system is a mixed bag. My high school maths teacher was an alcoholic. He pissed in a cupboard one year on a school trip to Inverness, and he just went back to work like nothing happened. The guy that taught woodwork was fired for distributing pornography, and my English teacher had a nervous breakdown. We never saw him again. But it's free. And that's the thing about Scottish people. We'll take it if it's free. Because the only thing better than cheap is free.